only when one listens that one places himself in a position to learn. Now, I was talking about it takes more courage to stay out of the market than it does to get into the market at a place you have no business entering. Staying out of the market can be tough, but not as tough as getting in somewhere you shouldn't be getting in, and then fighting to survive. Everybody, this is the natural wave movement of the market. This is natural. I don't know if it's going to bounce at a 382, 50, 618, 786, 86%, or if it's going to return all the way to 8. I don't know. And I don't think you know either. But what I do know is if it is going to wave in a direction, or if it's going to move in a direction, it's going to wave. And if it's going to wave down, it's going to wave in this sequence. It's going to wave like wave number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. I don't know. All I can tell you is if I enter the market anywhere below the 618, it doesn't work out for me overall long-term equity management-wise. If I enter the market at the 618 or higher, it works out for me. When I enter the market at the 618 and lower, I'm fighting to win. And I don't like to fight to win. I like to naturally win. Champion traders win their trades first before they execute the trade, while defeated traders fight to win. Now, as Winston Churchill said, and I've already told you this, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but courage is also what it takes to just sit down and listen. Okay? Would you consider yourself a good listener? Everybody that's listening to me, would you consider yourself a good listener? Usually what happens is when we take the time to listen to whatever we're being told, we have a tendency to start to formulate how that information can enhance our lives or how that information could hurt our lives. If we feel that that information could enhance our lives, we usually start to formulate ideas and even dreams. And to accomplish great things, we must not only act, but also dream. Not only plan, but also believe. You have to believe that you can become a successful currency trader. You have to believe that. You have to have that faith. Nothing great is ever accomplished. Nothing great has ever been accomplished by anybody unless they first had a dream and a belief, unless they had faith that, man, I can do this. See, but the fact of the matter is, true dreaming requires sacrifice and change. It requires a bigger backbone than it does a wishbone. Every dream is in the mind of the believer and in the hands of the doer. We're not given dreams without being given the ability to make those dreams come true. The challenge is we have to take the time to learn the skills necessary in order to make those dreams come true. And to take the time to learn the skill requires a backbone, not a wishbone. And once we start to acquire the skills, we now have to start changing our bad existing subconscious habits. And we have to start to address those bad habits and that change with a good attitude. Change needs to be looked at as an opportunity to make things better, not as a threat to make things worse. When I challenge everybody in this room to change, to say, hey, stop looking at the market this way. Don't get frustrated with me. I'm saying this to help each and every one of you step back, take a second look, start to look at it through my eyes. And what you need to learn is that the first step to change is humility. The second step is humility. And the third step is humility. Humility leads to strength and not to weakness. Humility is royalty without a crown. Humility is like a mature tree whose roots are deep in the earth, enabling it to rise higher, stand firmer, spread its branches further, and certainly last longer. It is the highest form of self-respect. And it is the only way in which you can get rid of your bad habits and turn them into good habits. It's the only way that you will take the time to truly introspect is when you have humility. Because without taking the time to introspect, without taking the time to say, man, what's going on with my trading? You won't take the necessary steps to change. Humility admits mistakes, and then it has the courage to amend them. Humility leads to self-improvement. Now, everybody has an ego. Some are big, some are small. Some are constructive, and some are destructive. Ego can really be good if it's a constructive ego. But if it's a destructive ego, then it starts to work against you. See, the majority of the world is confused about the definition of an ego. When they hear the term ego, they think immediately in terms of destructive and negative, when in fact there are two types of egos. There's the constructive ego and the destructive ego. It is the destructive ego that is harmful, and it is the constructive ego that is productive. See, a destructive ego is considered the anesthetic that dulls the pain of stupidity. It is the destructive ego that was born on third base. It goes around telling everyone that it just hit a triple. See, a destructive ego believes that this is their world and that the rest of us just live in it. They're so caught up into themselves that when they heard that science had discovered the center of the universe, they were heartbroken to find out that they weren't the center of the universe and it was named something else. See, a man that is wrapped up in himself certainly makes a small bundle. Destructive ego individuals, they're so naive that they're like the delusional rooster that thinks the sun rises to hear it crow. None are so empty as those who are so full of themselves. I think it is very important to swallow your pride, because after all, it's non-fattening. See, when the human life places itself to think it's better than the rest, that is usually the beginning of the end of that person. That's usually the beginning of the end when it comes time to trade. I lost $400,000 in one day because I was the FX chief. I was better than the rest. I used to approach this market like, don't you know who I am? And the person that believes he can live without others, without being mentored and being helped by others, is mistaken. The person who thinks others can't live without him is even more delusional. It is humility that gives one its freedom from its destructive ego and breaks the chains of poverty and mediocrity. Humility is the avenue we must take to prepare our minds for all the changes we need to make to reach our highest potential in our goals of trading. Humility is nothing but truth, and is the only way we will ever get a right judgment or assessment of ourselves. Pride is nothing more than a false assessment of ourselves filled with lies. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. Rather, it is thinking of yourself less. It is offering no resistance to change and opening your mind, enabling you to learn what you need to learn to improve your life, especially when it comes time to trading. Without humility, there is no humanity. Greatness does not lie in looking down on someone. Greatness lies only on looking down on someone to help them up. We are the highest when we stoop down to help someone up. A candle doesn't lose any of its light by sharing its light or lighting another candle. There are too many people who walk around thinking they are something they are not and overvalue what they think they are. We will all act out what we believe ourselves to be, regardless of what we truly are. My daughter, when she entered her late teens, boy, she felt the need to intellectually compete with anybody her age, younger or older, because in her mind she was 10 times more intelligent than everybody. You know the drill. You ever come across kids like that? Boy, when I was raising my kids, I used to think, man, I've got to start a company where my kids are on the board of directors because they know everything. I will be safe if they're on my board because these kids just know everything. Anyway, it got to the point where my daughter, it didn't matter what we were talking about, she always just had to be right. And I used to tell her, you know what, sweetheart, I'd rather be happy than right. You know, I'm not going to sit here and argue with a fool, for soon it's hard for the audience to determine who the fool is. No doubt, as time went on, the more irritated I got in talking with her, and the more I started to avoid her, and the more she became confident in her stupidity. And the more I started to watch her self-destruct and humiliate herself in front of other people, although in her mind she wasn't humiliating herself, but boy, she looked like a fool. And it wasn't until I started to say, you know what, I'm doing her a disservice by not challenging her and correcting her. Because what I'm doing is, by leaving her alone, I'm allowing her to build her destructive ego, and in the end it's going to hurt her more than it will ever help her. And so what I started to do is I started to engage with her intellectually. It wasn't until I got through her very thick head the concept that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a simple reason. We need to listen twice as much as we speak. See, that true humility and intelligence is like a river. The deeper it is, the less noise it makes. It wasn't until she finally got the concept that it was okay to say, you know what, Dad, I don't know. It took a long time for her to finally say, I don't know, and not feel embarrassed. When she finally humbled herself to say, I don't know, that's when her life started to change. See, the proof that you have rid yourself of your destructive ego and entered into emotional maturity is not by being able to tell the world about how pure we are, rather having an awareness of our impurities and needed humility for that needed change. I guess in all fairness, we are all hypocrites in some sort of transition towards a level of greatness that we are all searching for in order to reach our highest potential in this life. Since man will act out what he believes himself to be, regardless of the truth, one must be extremely careful with their self-perception. It is really a constructive ego one has versus a destructive ego that turns one from mediocrity into success or greatness. I've learned that in many cases the difference between the destructive ego and the constructive ego is really the line in the sand and the turning point that can take you to where you really need to go. Some people are always ready to attack and level those above them as well as those below them. I see it every day. As I give presentations sometimes around the world, I never cease to be amazed at how many people try to humiliate me, try to prove a point that I don't know what I'm talking about. And no doubt, there's a lot of things in life I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what to think of Bill. But when it comes time to talk about trading on the Forex, you better be prepared. Because this is one thing I know about. Many people believe that humility is the opposite of pride, when in fact it is a point of equilibrium. See, the opposite of pride is actually the lack of self-esteem. A person who walks around with humility is totally a different person from the person who cannot recognize who they truly are or appreciate themselves to be one of God's masterpieces. Be not mistaken, humility does not mean weakness. It is positioning yourself to become more aware of realities and potential problems or challenges that can be turned into opportunities in your life. Humility, not the lack of power. Humility is not the lack of power. Let me change that right now. Humility is not the lack of power. Humility is power. It is critical in life to humble ourselves and to be mentored towards greatness, to truly listen more than we speak. I've been to Africa and South Africa several times, and on one of my trips I decided to take a trip to the Aldo National Elephant Reserve. It was on one of these trips that I learned the importance of surrounding yourself with mentors and older people who can teach you what is right, and the importance of constantly listening and humbling yourselves about what needs to be done in order to live a productive life. You come into this mentorship to learn from me. I've been around, I'm 60 years old. I'm really only 18 with 42 years of experience. But be that as it may, I've been around and I can teach you a lot about how to be successful in this market. But on this trip down into Africa, when I was visiting the Aldo National Park, which is an elephant reserve, we rode around for about 4 hours looking for elephants, couldn't even find one. And then all of a sudden the driver said, you know, now that I've gone everywhere, I know where they're all at. And so he says it's about a 45-minute drive, and we drove on these dirt roads for 45 minutes, and all of a sudden we pulled up to this ravine. The driver stopped the truck, and then he says, everyone get out of the car and follow me, which we did. And we walked to the top of this ravine, and over this ravine was a mud hole. And I looked down at that mud hole, and there was about 400 elephants. I videotaped it all. And as we stood there taking pictures and videotaping it, I started to notice that there would be a fight break out between these elephants every now and then. And then all of a sudden, a huge giant elephant would come over and flap its ears, smack the other elephants with his trunk, and then, of course, they would break up, and I'd say, what's that about? You'd say, well, the young elephants, the elephants that are fighting, those are teenage elephants. They're like teenagers. They're just kind of like out of control. And what usually happens is a grandmother or a mother elephant will come by and slap them around and tell them to knock it off. That's not what they're supposed to do. Well, the geniuses of the national park said, you know what, let's separate these teenage elephants from the rest of the pack so that there's more peace in the herd. And so they did. They took about 200 young male elephants from the herd and they put them in another reserve, all these young teenage elephants. To their surprise, within months, a bunch of rhinos start showing up dead. Now you need to realize that a rhinoceros has no enemies. But all of a sudden, all these rhinoceroses were showing up dead. So what they did is they started to capture some rhinoceroses. They put some video cameras on them, and then they kind of monitored them. As they monitored these rhinos, what they found out is these herds of young elephants were coming around and beating up and killing the rhinos. What they discovered is that when you disrupt the natural cycle of learning, you take away the structure that keeps someone humble, forcing them to listen as they learn. And if you take away that natural cycle, there will be a high probability of individuals going rogue and self-destructing. How many of you approach your trading as if you know more than me, as if you know more than what's been laid out in this course? I'm not saying I know everything, but I certainly know enough to make between 1,000 and 2,000 pips a week, and I think that speaks volumes. How many of you are turning rogue? How many of you are self-destructing because you feel you don't need to humble yourself and listen to the chief or listen to your strategy? What they concluded at the Aldo National Parks is that they needed to reunite the young elephants with their parents, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, allowing their aunts and uncles and moms and dads and grandparents to mentor and naturally teach these young elephants the natural process of learning by keeping them humble. After all, there is no room for arrogance when you're a young adult elephant up against an uncle or a grandparent 3 times your size, or worse yet, a group of them who are saying, shape up or we're going to knock you out. When we don't have anyone in our lives that we can humble ourselves in front of, who's willing to teach us what we need to know about the subject that we're trying to learn and master, and listen to the profound things they have to say, we take the risk of not knowing how to live a healthy, productive life. We take the risk of not knowing what to properly do. We take the risk of not knowing the skills. And we take the risk of forcing ourselves to take a longer time to learn. And we take the risk of self-destructing. If you can't humble yourself and listen to what you need to learn about trading, you won't make it. Because when we stop listening, we stop learning, and when we stop learning, we stop progressing. So as you move forward, learning to trade, Learn to listen with humility, and never forget that people that are there to help you are the ones who know what it feels like to have fallen down. People say to me all the time, Chief, why do you give so much? I don't give so much because I have a lot to give. I give so much because I know what it's like not to have. And I also know, because I've never been up against anything in my life that is so demoralizing, so humiliating, so ego, what should I say? I have never been emotionally raped in my life by anything or anyone in this world other than the Forex market. This market has done things to me that I never thought were possible to be done, and you probably feel the same way. So what I wouldn't have given to have a mentor in my life who would have said, hey Jared, this is what you need to do, been there, done that, you need to buckle down and try not to reinvent this wheel. You're going to just waste a lot of time if you try to reinvent this wheel. Trust me, let my hindsight be your foresight. As I said, hold on. Okay. Everybody, there's a saying that Stephen Covey, I was fortunate enough to be mentored by Stephen Covey at a young age, at the ripe old age of 22 years old. I sat with him for a whole entire year. He's the one that wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He's passed away now. He endorsed one of my books, but he taught me this. He said, Jared, what does nothing feels like success? I said, I don't know. And he said to me, let me explain this process. Every day of your life, you're going to get up and you're going to be confronted with opportunities and challenges, even problems that need to be addressed and solved. When confronted with a challenge, when confronted with an opportunity, when confronted with a problem, you need to answer that challenge, that problem, with an answer that is greater than the problem. And if you answer the challenge or the problem with an answer that's greater than the problem, you will incur success. But if you answer with an answer that is not equal or greater than the problem or challenge, you will fail. How many times do you turn on the charts, everybody? How many times do you turn on the charts